Across a swath of West Africa, between the sweltering heat of August 2020 and the height of July 2023, a quiet storm was brewing, one that would shake the very foundations of regional power dynamics. In a series of stunning, often sudden moves, the governments of Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger were overthrown, not by external forces, but by their own men in uniform. These were soldiers who claimed a singular, urgent goal: to forge a brighter future for their nations, free from the shackles of the past. This wave of coups had an immediate, dramatic consequence. Long-standing Western powers, accustomed to wielding significant influence, found themselves unceremoniously ushered out of the continent, a public, embarrassing spectacle on the global stage. In the vacuum that followed, a new alliance began to take shape, one that has since become a constant thorn in the side of Western leaders. At the heart of this burgeoning defiance is a small, landlocked country, Burkina Faso, and the figure casting a long shadow over diplomatic sleepless nights is a young military officer, Captain Ibrahim Traore. Traore is a man who has captured the imagination of young people across Africa. Since seizing power, he has actively worked to uplift his people from crushing poverty and drastically reduce dependence on foreign aid. Yet his path has been anything but smooth. The United States, among others, has voiced clear displeasure, and unsettling reports circulate of at least 18 assassination attempts on his life since he took the helm of this West African nation. The question that hangs in the air is stark. How did a relatively unknown soldier become one of the 21st century's most feared African leaders, a figure so significant that powerful forces seem determined to remove him? This is the story of Ibrahim Traore, the man many in the West now eye with deep apprehension. To truly understand this seismic shift, this revolution gripping Africa, and why it resonates so profoundly both at home and abroad, we must rewind the clock. Our story begins in a time when Burkina Faso was known as a Republic of Upper Volta. The year was 1960. A powerful current of freedom swept across the African continent, and the Republic of Upper Volta was carried along on that tide, proudly declaring its independence from France. The French had imposed a brutal, oppressive rule over the region since the late 19th century. But by the end of World War II, global pressure mounted, forcing European colonial powers to loosen their grip. When the call for freedom reached Upper Volta, the people erupted in unbridled joy. Freedom at long last. In the late 1960s, Maurice Yimiogo stepped in as the first president. He spoke of radical change, of building a new nation, but his methods quickly became a concern. He consolidated power ruthlessly, ensuring no opposition could take root. Under his voltaic democratic union, Upper Volta became a one-party state. Disturbingly, his administration remained deeply reliant on France, with French advisors occupying crucial roles within the military and civil government. This echo of colonialism, this neo-colonial relationship, angered the people. But Yimiogo ignored their grievances. His rule grew increasingly autocratic. Critics were jailed, relatives appointed to key positions, and lavish spending became commonplace despite widespread poverty. Austerity measures combined with his authoritarian style soon ignited widespread discontent. By late 1965, nationwide strikes and demonstrations, fueled by wage cuts and the end of subsidies for traditional chiefs, brought the country to a standstill. The government faltered. Yimiogo declared a state of emergency, but protests intensified, a raw reflection of the people's economic frustration under his rigid single-party rule. Into this chaos stepped the military. On January 3, 1966, army led by Lieutenant Colonel Senghor Lamizana seized power, forcing President Yimiogo to resign and placing him under house arrest. Lamizana assumed the presidency days later, on January 7th. The new regime acted swiftly, suspending the Constitution and dissolving the National Assembly. This intervention, the first of many in the country's post-colonial history, was initially welcomed by a populace exhausted by Yimiogo's misrule. With popular support behind him, Lamizana began to reshape the country. One of his first significant acts was establishing the nation's first military academy in Ouagadougou. This institution, intended to train future leaders, offered a life-changing opportunity to 3 select secondary school graduates, granted full scholarships. Among those chosen was a young man named Thomas Sankara. He would become pivotal to our story much later. The late 1960s and 70s saw continued political tension. The initial hope in Lamazana faded as people realized he mirrored Yumiogo. He tightened his grip on power, reinforcing military rule and banning political parties in 1966. Yet, seeking a veneer of civilian legitimacy, Lamazana drafted a new constitution, approved in 1970, ushering in a second republic. At the military academy, Thomas Sankara found an unexpected mentor in Ibrahim Traore, a history and geography instructor known for his progressive views. Recognizing Sankara's sharp intellect, Traore invited him and other promising students to secret, informal discussions outside official lessons. In these clandestine meetings, Traore introduced Sankara to revolutionary ideas that would forever shape his thinking: the global fight against imperialism and neocolonialism, the Soviet and Chinese revolutions, and the liberation movements sweeping across Africa. Upon completing his initial training, Sankara embarked on an advanced program abroad, years that would prove profoundly influential. Back in Ouagadougou, the government remained fragmented. Parliamentary elections in December 1970 led to a civilian prime minister, hinting at a return to civilian rule. But Lamazana retained ultimate authority, and tensions between the military and political class simmered over power sharing. Political strife wasn't the only challenge. By 1973, a devastating drought gripped the Sahel region, crippling Upper Volta's economy and intensifying the hardship for ordinary citizens. Lamazana's fragile experiment with democracy faltered under the weight of economic strain and political infighting. On February 8, 1974, he dissolved the civilian government and National Assembly, suspending his own 1970 constitution. He declared himself prime minister, ruling by decree, arguing tough measures were needed to address the crisis. Full military rule was short-lived. Facing internal pressure and external demands from international donors, Lamazana agreed to resume the democratic transition. He lifted the ban on political parties in 1977 and oversaw a new constitution, legalizing multi-party politics, overwhelmingly approved by referendum. In May 1978, free elections were held. Lamazana ran and won re-election, marking the Third Republic and a brief return to civilian rule under a military leader. But economic woes, rising debt, unemployment, and elite factionalism persisted, setting the stage for more upheaval. While Lamazana's government stumbled from one crisis to another, seemingly indifferent to the suffering of its people, Thomas Sankara returned to Upper Volta in October 1973, his mind buzzing with ideas. He envisioned the military not merely as a defense force, but as an engine for national development. As a second lieutenant, Sankara quickly distinguished himself. Training recruits in Bobo Dioulasso, he blended traditional military discipline with civic education, drawing attention within the military hierarchy. Transferred to the Army's Engineering Corps in Ouagadougou in March 1974, he continued to demonstrate not just skill, but a fierce desire to build a better country for its ordinary people. Sankara began using his position to push for social change, but the unpopular Lamazana government was increasingly unstable. After 14 years, the military had grown tired of Lamazana. In 1980, they intervened yet again. Colonels Say Zerbo and Gabriel led a junta, the Military Committee of Recovery for National Progress, taking power on November 25, 1980. Zerbo abolished the Constitution, dissolved Parliament, and banned political parties, restoring strict military rule. He promised to fight corruption and instill discipline, but failed to gain popular support or build credible civilian partnerships. Initially refusing a ministerial post, Sankara eventually agreed to become Minister of Information under Zerbo in September 1981. He immediately stood apart. He eschewed the perks of office, famously cycling to work instead of using an official car. Political and social tensions continued to mount as Zerbo's reform promises faltered. The regime clamped down on dissent, detaining student activists and arresting union leaders. Factions emerged within the government. Sankara and other radical junior officers formed circles of reflection within the military, strategizing with students and union leaders. After months of trying to influence the government from within, Sankara made a dramatic public stand. On April 12, 1982, during a fiery speech broadcast live on radio at a conference of African ministers, with President Zerbo in attendance, the young revolutionary publicly resigned. He accused the regime of serving minority interests and delivered a powerful plea for freedom of expression. This act was unacceptable to Zerbo. Like clockwork, Sankara was arrested, demoted, and exiled to a military camp. Chaos and infighting deepened within the ruling class. Zerbo's rivals began plotting. On November 7, 1982, soldiers led by Colonel Samuian overthrew Zerbo. Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo became president, promising to fight mismanagement. Sankara, whose direct role in this coup remains unclear, found himself back in a position of influence, reluctantly accepting the post of prime minister. But within months, ideological divides fractured the new leadership, a rift that would prove irreparable. The breaking point came in May 1983, when irreconcilable differences led to Sankara's sudden arrest by men loyal to President Ouedraogo. His arrest ignited immediate protests, with large crowds demanding his release. As tensions escalated, Sankara's supporters, fearing for his life, began preparing for a decisive move. On August 4, 1983, in a swift coup, Blaise Compaoré and Commander Jean-Baptiste Ligny, two officers with close ties to Sankara, seized key positions in the capital, effectively toppling Ouedraogo's government. That evening, Thomas Sankara, at just 33 years old, announced the dawn of a new revolutionary era. He was now the head of state under the National Council of the Revolution, CNR. Sankara embarked on a mission to transform his people's fortunes. He traveled the country, listening, engaging, seeking solutions to the nation's many problems. In August 1984, a year into his rule, Sankara renamed the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, land of incorruptible people. He launched ambitious reforms emphasizing self-reliance and social justice, mass vaccination and literacy campaigns, tree planting to combat desertification, and initiatives to advance women's rights. His administration demanded transparency, requiring officials, including himself, to disclose their finances and cutting luxury perks for the elite. These radical policies earned him immense love and support from his people. His influence spread beyond Burkina Faso. The nation became a beacon across Africa, admired for Sankara's revolutionary leadership. On the international stage, he delivered powerful speeches challenging colonial powers and their policies that kept Africa impoverished. This made him a prominent global figure, but also many enemies. Not everyone celebrated Sankara's widespread popularity. Traditional authorities, the middle class, and crucially, external powers, France and Ivory Coast prominent among them, felt threatened by his anti-imperialist rhetoric and alignment with socialist states. They began plotting. A key factor setting Sankara apart was his outright refusal of foreign aid, especially the conditional assistance offered by the IMF, which he feared would undermine his goals. Instead, he invested heavily in agriculture, believing self-sufficiency was paramount. His agricultural revolution saw cereal production increase by 75% between 1983 and 1986. But it was on the international stage that Sankara truly challenged the old order. His Pan-Africanist foreign policy earned allies, but generated tension with Western powers and conservative African governments closely tied to France, including Mali, Togo, and Côte d'Ivoire. As Sankara's revolution deepened, divisions within the ruling CNR emerged. Foreign powers exploited these fissures, influencing close allies like Blaise Compaoré. Sankara, who had once trusted Compaoré implicitly, grew increasingly estranged by his former friend's rising wealth and ambition. With international backing from Côte d'Ivoire, France, Libya, and reportedly even the United States, Compaoré built a loyal force ready to strike. On October 15, 1987, Blaise Compaoré staged a coup against his former friend, citing deviations from the revolution and alleging Sankara jeopardized foreign relations. In a bloody takeover, President Sankara and at least 12 members of his close council were brutally murdered in cold blood, a tragic end to a revolutionary dream. In the days that followed, thousands of Burkinabe wept at Sankara's gravesite. The coup shocked Africa. The continent's outspoken anti-imperialist voice was silenced. The circumstances of his killing and the extent of foreign involvement will remain a source of pain and contention for decades. Many of Sankara's comrades who refused to support the new regime were hunted down, detained, beaten, or forced into exile. However, 5 months after Thomas Sankara's assassination, another revolutionary was born. Ibrahim Traore, born March 14, 1988, in the humble village of Kara, west of Burkina Faso, grew up in a modest rural family. They were not spared the hardship that descended upon the country after Sankara's murder. Blaise Compaoré's new regime dismantled Sankara's gains. He courted social elites and bureaucrats, restored relations with France and Ivory Coast, and cracked down brutally on dissent, eliminating political rivals just as previous military rulers had done. As he courted favor in Paris and grew closer to the IMF, selling off the country's interests, he sought to legitimize his rule. A new constitution in 1991 established the Fourth Republic, promising multi-party elections. But the election in December 1991 was a farce. Compaoré won easily as the opposition boycotted, and few people turned out. Throughout the 90s, Compaoré maintained a tight grip, winning a rigged re-election in 1998. He implemented structural adjustment programs lauded by foreign backers and encouraged foreign investment, particularly in mining. His economic policies brought layoffs and soaring costs of living, making life increasingly difficult for the average Burkinabe. But Compaoré, by the 2000s one of Africa's longest-serving leaders, seemed indifferent. By 2008, the fortunes of the Burkinabe people had plummeted. Spiraling food and fuel prices ignited riots and looting in Ouagadougou and other cities. It was during this turbulent time that Ibrahim Traore began his military career, enlisting in 2009. He trained at the Georges Namono Military Academy, graduating as a second lieutenant around 2012. He received specialized anti-aircraft warfare training in Morocco before being assigned to an infantry unit in Kaya, deep in the country's volatile north. Back in Ouagadougou, Compaoré faced the greatest threat to his rule yet. The perfect storm of grievances that erupted into widespread unrest in 2011. Student protests ignited after a high schooler died in police custody, sparking anger over police brutality. This was swiftly followed by army mutinies over unpaid allowances and low wages, with soldiers firing in the air and looting. Student, civilian, and military dissent converged into a nationwide crisis. By late April 2011, gunfire was heard near the presidential palace, forcing Compaoré to briefly flee. Sensing existential danger, Compaoré took drastic measures. He dissolved the government and military high command, declared himself Minister of Defense, and offered concessions, raised soldier pay, bonuses for civil servants, lower food prices, and promises of justice for the slain student. The immediate crisis subsided, but the cracks in Compaoré's regime were exposed. Open talk of political change filled the air for the first time in decades. By 2014, Compaoré had been in power for 27 years. Many Burkinabe desperately wanted change. The Constitution limited presidents to 2 terms, meaning he should step down in 2015. But his ruling party moved to remove term limits, allowing him to run again. This plan proved to be his undoing. In late October 2014, as legislators gathered to pass the amendment, massive protests erupted. On October 30th, tens of thousands, led by civil society groups like Balai Citoyen, the Citizens' Broom, stormed and torched the parliament to stop the vote. Demonstrators ransacked government buildings and the state TV station. The army tried to restore order, and Compaoré declared a state of emergency. But the protests only grew. Finally, on October 31st, overwhelmed by the insurrection, Compaoré resigned and fled the country. His dramatic fall was hailed as a new dawn, one of the rare instances in Africa where a mass uprising toppled a long-ruling president. Power briefly shifted between military chiefs before Lieutenant Colonel Isaac Zita declared himself head of state, promising military guidance during the transition. But for the average Burkinabe, little truly changed. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Traore rose steadily through the military ranks. In 2014, he joined the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, battling Islamic militants across the border. He faced heavy combat in northern Mali, earning recognition for his courage during major attacks in 2018. Returning home, Traore engaged in counterinsurgency operations against jihadist groups ravaging northern Burkina Faso, seeing action in hotspots like Djibo and participating in the 2019 Otapinu offensive. By 2020, Ibrahim Traore had reached the rank of captain at 32. With his promotion came growing frustration. His country was collapsing, and he felt powerless. He and other frontline officers endured poor equipment and logistical support, while senior officials in the capital were perceived as corrupt and comfortable, a betrayal of the troops' sacrifices. Stationed in the embattled north, Captain Traore became an informal voice for young officers enraged by the government's ineffectiveness against the insurgency. Back in Ouagadougou, political infighting plagued the government since Sankara's fall. Different authorities came and went, all struggling to stabilize the country for elections. Finally, Roch-Marc Christian Kabore, a former Sankara loyalist who had joined the opposition, was elected president. This peaceful transfer of power was seen as a watershed moment, a turn towards electoral democracy. But the presence of Islamic terrorists meant peace remained elusive. By 2021, attacks continued across the country, and public confidence in Kabore plummeted. After a deadly ambush in Annada killed 53 gendarmes in late 2021, popular anger exploded. Street protests erupted in November, denouncing the government's inability to protect citizens and calling for Kabore's resignation. Kabore reshuffled the military leadership and appointed a new prime minister, seeking international help and dialogue with some armed groups, but these measures brought little immediate improvement. Within the army, frustration mounted. Troops felt outgunned and undersupplied. This volatile mix of civilian unrest and military dissent set the stage for the next crisis. On January 21st, 2022, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba led a coup, ousting the elected President Kabore. Captain Traore, who had vocally advocated for a change in strategy, supported the coup and helped bring Damiba's junta, the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration, MPSR, to power. In March 2022, Traore was appointed commander of a field artillery regiment in Kaya, returning him to front lines with increased responsibility. However, in the months that followed, it became clear that Damiba's leadership wasn't quickly improving the security situation. His junta struggled against jihadist violence, leading to growing dissatisfaction among officers, especially those like Traore fighting on the ground. According to Traore, Damiba's personal ambitions diverted him from the military's stated goals, prompting discussions about removing him. Tensions boiled over in September 2022 after an insurgent ambush killed 11 soldiers and dozens of civilians, sparking outrage in both the military and public. This tragedy highlighted the government's failures and pushed Traore and his comrades to action. By late September, Captain Traore and a small group of junior officers resolved to depose Damiba to salvage the failing war effort. On September 30th, 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traore launched Burkina Faso's second military takeover in 8 months. The coup was swift and largely bloodless. Traore, still a low-ranking captain, mobilized loyal units, reportedly including elite special forces, and seized strategic sites in the capital. Gunfire was heard near the presidential palace and national television station as the plotters moved against Damiba's faction. By evening, Traore appeared on television, surrounded by armed soldiers, announcing Damiba's overthrow. On October 2nd, 2022, the junta named Traore as president of the ruling MPSR Council. Less than a week later, at just 34 years old, Ibrahim Traore was formally sworn in as Burkina Faso's transitional president. His next moves would shock many and provoke powerful reactions from those who suddenly sought his removal. The resolution, challenging the old guard, forging new paths. From day one, Traore presented himself as a wartime leader singularly focused on Burkina Faso survival. He cultivated an image of discipline and pragmatism, often seen in his uniform and trademark red beret. He speaks infrequently, but his controlled communications project an air of mystery. When he does address the nation, it is to rally the populace, emphasizing that regaining security is the government's paramount mission. He frequently visits military outposts, discussing battlefield updates and reinforcing his focus on front lines. While critics accuse the junta of propaganda, Proponents point to Traore's actions aimed at improving his people's lives. Like Thomas Sankara before him, Traore has been an outspoken critic of imperialism and corruption. In a powerful symbolic gesture, Traore refused to enrich himself or even take a higher rank after seizing power. Unlike many coup leaders who promote themselves to general, Traore chose to remain a captain, signaling his commitment to sacrifice and anti-corruption values. He reportedly declined his presidential salary, emphasizing his lack of personal gain. Restoring security has been central to Traore's agenda. Within weeks of taking office, he took drastic steps, announcing a nationwide campaign to recruit tens of thousands of civilian volunteers into auxiliary defense units. The goal was 50,000 volunteers for the defense of the homeland, local fighters assisting the army by protecting their communities. Traore aimed to supplement an overstretched national army with sheer numbers. These volunteers receive brief training and operate alongside soldiers, defending villages and patrolling territories the military struggles to cover. The enlistment drive saw an overwhelming response, exceeding targets, demonstrating Traore's commitment to an all-hands-on-deck approach against extremism. Traore made it clear his goal is outright victory, not negotiation. He vowed to reconquer every inch of territory held by militants, stating there would be no talks until groups were militarily weakened to a point where they couldn't dictate terms. Beyond security, Traore has pursued economic resilience and anti-corruption measures. To maximize state revenue from natural resources and potentially curb illicit financing of militancy, Traore moved to gain greater control over the gold mining sector, a pillar of Burkina Faso's economy. Burkina Faso is the 15th largest gold producer globally. Contrastingly, France holds the 4th largest gold reserves but has no active gold mines. This historical context adds weight to France's reported anger at Traore's recent moves. In November 2023, his cabinet approved the construction of the country's first state-run gold refinery to process gold domestically rather than exporting raw ore. This project aims to create jobs and retain more value from production. In February 2024, Traore's government suspended export permits for small-scale miners, attempting to crack down on smuggling and illicit trade that siphons wealth from the treasury. While Traore seeks long-term sovereignty over resources and finances, some powerful entities are displeased, notably the United States and France. Comments and actions like these are not without consequence. Traore has since been battling for his life, with the security forces reportedly thwarting numerous assassination attempts. On the international front, Burkina Faso under Traore has undergone a dramatic foreign policy shift, distancing itself from traditional Western partners and forging new alliances. An early move was redefining relations with former colonial ruler France. Traore came to power amid strong anti-French sentiment, fueled by the perception that French military presence in the Sahel failed to stop terrorism. In January 2023, his government formally requested the departure of French troops. By February 2023, French military operations ceased and forces exited. The junta also expelled France's ambassador and suspended French-backed media, ending years of neo-colonial influence. With French influence curtailed, Traore strengthened ties with alternative allies. Regionally, he formed an unprecedented strategic alliance with Mali and later Niger, neighboring countries also led by juntas facing jihadist rebellions and ECOWAS sanctions. Traore, Mali's Assimi Goïta, and Niger's Abdourahmane Tiani found common cause. In September 2023, as ECOWAS threatened intervention against Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali jointly declared a declaration of war against them, openly defying the regional bloc. The three regimes formalized their solidarity, announcing withdrawal from ECOWAS in protest, and proposing a new regional grouping focused on mutual defense and sovereignty. By July 2024, this became the Alliance of Sahel States, a historic geopolitical shift rejecting foreign interference. Traore was instrumental in its founding. Beyond Africa, Russia has emerged as an influential player. Traore's government expressed goodwill, seeing Russia as an alternative security partner. His foreign policy is marked by a strong Pan-African nationalist streak, framing Burkina Faso's struggle within the broader context of African nations striving for true sovereignty. Burkina Faso has cooperated closely with Mali in expelling French-linked institutions and supported Guinea, another junta-ruled state under sanctions. Official communications emphasize self-determination, non-interference, and African solidarity, earning admiration among Africans resentful of foreign meddling. However, this stance has isolated Burkina Faso diplomatically from some traditional partners and aid donors concerned about its trajectory. Relations with the United States and European Union have cooled, though limited humanitarian aid continues. Security cooperation has scaled back. Yet, Burkina Faso remains engaged with organizations like the UN for humanitarian needs and has fostered ties with emerging powers like China and regional players like Algeria. Africa has not seen a leader quite like Traore since Thomas Sankara. While Western powers and their allies reportedly conspired to kill Sankara in the 80s, the world watches Ibrahim Traore closely. Actions against him are met with public protest. You may not agree with his governance style or prefer Western-style democracy, and that is understandable. But to the people of Burkina Faso and Africans generally, what matters is their self-determination. That is what Traore represents. And perhaps that is why he is the man many in the West fear the most. Thank you for watching. If you found this story insightful, please subscribe to our channel for more historical and geopolitical deep dives. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Ibrahim Traore and the situation in Burkina Faso.